'Tis I. Hey everyone, glad to see you back, glad to see you looking fresh. So, today I'm going to be talking about Live Alive, a great game that came out earlier this year and honestly is in pretty good contention for Game of the Year in my book. But a certain other RPG is probably going to sweep it at the Game Awards if you know the one I'm talking about. But anyways, today I'm going to be talking about my favorite chapters of Live Alive, whatever you want to call it. I think it's technically pronounced Live Alive, but I'm going to call it Live Alive because it just rolls off my tongue a lot better. So I'm going to be breaking down the 8 main character chapters. Obviously, the final chapter gets a little bit of a boost for being really interesting and having a great conclusion to the whole thing. But if you haven't played the game yet, I will say when it's coming, but the 8th chapter isn't one you can choose from the get-go, so you might not know about it, so I guess minor spoiler warnings. But like I said, when it comes to that one, I'll give a heads up and I'll tell you the time code to skip and all that fun stuff. So anyways, let's just jump right into this thing.
Number 8.
And of course, we're going to start at the bottom with my least favorite, which is the distant future. As a story, I didn't mind the character of Q, but I didn't mind this whole idea of the spaceship and being in space and all that. I thought it could have been really interesting. This is the least combat in any of the chapters. The only combat is, of course, the final boss fight, and there's like a game you can play, an arcade game you can play in it, which just has the combat of the rest of the game. When it comes to the story, I feel like I've seen this kind of story before. It's kind of a combination of Alien and The Thing, where you don't really know what's happening and you don't really know who's doing it. It's an interesting idea, but to just have a wave of constant text coming at you, and of course the world building in it is wonderful, but it's just a lot of walking around to the next point. Hear someone talk to the next point, at its core, obviously. I think when it comes down to it, the reason I'm so harsh on this one and why it's at the bottom is because my save file got corrupted right at the end. Like, legitimately 20 minutes before we were able to pick another chapter, I turned the game off and came back and it wasn't working anymore. So I got really mad at it and I just had to speed run this chapter, and I was just sick of it at that point. And at that point, I was already pretty low on my list, so having to do it again didn't help it, and that's why it ends up last on my list.
Number 7.
Next up, we have the near future, which, settings-wise and going into it, I knew probably wasn't going to be my favorite either. But a kid with superpowers and getting to play in big mech suits seems pretty dope, and I was very excited to play with that stuff. But the whole weird map situation this one does, and the story, again, much like my problems with Distant Future, requires you to walk here, walk back, walk somewhere else, walk again, and it's back and forth a lot. It never fully comes together for me, and there was a lot of times where I was like, I don't know what the heck to do. I don't know where to go. That's the problem with one of the ones going up, but we'll get to that when we get to that. And the characters, Akira is a pretty cool dude. I like him, and I really like the turtle mech. I thought that was a really weird, interesting sci-fi situation. He was fun to have in the party. Overall, it feels disconnected from itself because the final boss is something super outlandish compared to like what's going on for the rest of the story. And it's good. It's pretty good, like typical RPG stuff, but set in the near future. It's not bad.
Number 6.
Next up, we have Imperial China. This is the first one I played, and it was pretty good to say the least. Getting to play as an old kung fu master and getting to train 3 different disciples, which I learned after the fact that you can kind of pick who you want. And I just so happened to pick the young kid, and he was my disciple going forward. I think this is a pretty good chapter to start with, so I'm pretty happy that this is the one I ended up picking first. It gives a good explanation of how combat works. Like, literally, you're a master teaching people how to fight, so it makes sense that the game would work in a way that it would teach you how to fight as well. I think in conjunction and everything, I think this is the best starting point. So for that, it's good. Other than that, like, the villains are okay, and the world is small enough that it doesn't feel like you have to go here to there everywhere. It's also big enough to feel like you're exploring different spots and whatnot. But overall, being the first, the characters, there are a lot of them that I don't remember all that well, and the locales kind of all blend together. You know, when talking about 8 different chapters being 6, you know, we're in that middle range, so it's good, but not the best.
Number 5.
I'm sure people have skipped this part if they're afraid of the spoilers, but the Middle Ages. I think I don't rate it as high because this one feels a little bit unfair. It gets a little bit of a special treatment, which makes sense in the sense of the whole story, but the characters, everything are much more fleshed out. This one feels the most like your stereotypical RPG, like you're in the Middle Ages. It's swords and castles and demons and princesses and all the typical RPG stuff you come to know. So it's great in that aspect, and you get to go on a quest, and there's a map, and there's a lot of places to go and people to meet, and it's great. But like I said, the game plays it a little too much favoritism, and I'm not a huge fan of the random battles. I like being able to see the enemies, which most of the rest of the game did that, so having this one randomly go into the random battle encounter, it was fine, but I missed having the ability to see the enemies coming and to be able to prepare, dodge out of the way, or go headfirst into attack them. This one, it's constant battle the whole way through. But if you love the combat, you'll love this one more, and like I said, this one is great. I just wish it didn't play as much favoritism, but in the sense of the story, it's good.
Number 4.
So, in 4th, we have the present day, or the Street Fighter section. This one is probably the shortest, but that quick boss battle rush in it, I think is great. It straight up looks like the Street Fighter 2 screen, like it's just pick your fight. You want to pick this guy, you want to pick the luchador to fight first, or whoever, or the sumo wrestler, whoever you want to fight first or second, and you get to go through and you get to learn their moves if you play it right, and you get to master different combat techniques and be able to fight them differently. And I think that one is the most concise, most boiled down to what makes Live Alive fun. When the combat works, it is great, and it's very strategic and tactical, but also just, it's fluid and it's fun. And I think this one does it the best out of any of them. I think the combat really is perfected here, and I really like the characters, and final boss makes sense. And like I said, this was the shortest one, so it's fun to be able to replay this one, because this one, you know, of course, you don't have to, but you get to learn a bunch of moves through all these masters. If you get hit with one of their special moves, you can learn one of their special moves. So playing it in a very specific way so you don't lose, but you get to get hit by everything, and then you don't want to take them out too fast because you don't want to lose your opportunity to get the move, but you can just like play it very specifically, and it plays a little bit different than the rest of the game. So for that, I give present day. It starts our top half. I think it's great.
Number 3.
Number 3, we have Twilights of Ido, Japan. This one, I think, is probably the most divisive. I don't really know. I haven't looked too much into people's different opinions on where they rank their different chapters, but for me, I loved the setting. I loved the art. Obviously, the art of the whole game is amazing, but just the way the lighting and everything works, the music is phenomenal. This is the most beautiful chapter in the game, in my opinion. And I enjoy that it gives you basically 3 different options. You can go through this castle and you can slaughter everybody. You can straight up meet every goon, bodyguard, every person, and take them out. Or you can go the complete opposite of that and dodge and hide and sneak and get through this castle without taking out anybody you don't have to. Obviously, this one still has combat encounters with, like, bosses that you have to fight. The sneaking one gives you a better outcome, and it gives you a better item, but it's way harder, and it's kind of convoluted. I say kind of. It's pretty convoluted. Like, you really have to go in a very specific pattern, and I very much recommend looking up a guide. You can figure it out on your own. I would imagine it's quite difficult to figure out exactly where to go, when to go there, and do everything in this very specific pattern the game wants you to do it in. But, of course, if you don't want to do either of those 2 methods, you can kind of split it down the middle, and you don't get a perfect reward either way, because if you take out everybody, you get a ton of experience points. And if you save everybody, you get a great weapon. But if you kind of split the difference, you can kind of get through it very easily. So that's an option too. That's why I think this one is great, even though both ends of the spectrum are quite hard. It's probably the hardest chapter.
Number 2.
Number 2, we have Prehistory. And the prehistoric times, you get to play as a caveman, and your entire quest is to impress a cave woman, and you have a gorilla best friend, and you're just smacking ancient beasts and, finding meat, you're hunting, you're gathering, and trying to live life. And I think it's such an interesting idea for a chapter in like an RPG. And I don't think I've ever played a game before where you get to play as a caveman, at least not one that's this memorable or interesting. And the story, having no dialogue, be told through grunts, groans, and laughs and whatnot, is very solid for what it is. It's very simple, but it would be, of course, because it's a prehistoric story. They're not going to be told a grand epic of cavemen. That's not how it works. So, plus the final boss is totally awesome because of what it is, and it totally makes sense. This one gets a little bit of flack from people because there are some fights where you kind of get stuck. And there was one in particular where you don't really know it's coming. If you're underleveled, you're kind of screwed. You really have to be a certain level to be able to pull it off. And even I was underleveled, but I really remembered playing it in a very strategic way. I was able to weasel my way out. But other than that, I think this chapter as a whole is excellent. Plus the music's great too.
Number 1.
And my favorites, if you couldn't guess it if you played this game, obviously, is the Wild West section. Another pretty quick one. This isn't I think this is the second shortest behind the present day Street Fighter one. And you're basically just playing as a Western cowboy, and you show up in a town, and you have to save it from bandits, which is a very typical Western movie plot. So it was very fun to see that. It was very fun to play through that. And you walk around this whole town, and it's timed. So there will be 12, I think, bell rings. And every time a bell rings, get a little closer, and you have to walk around this whole town, and you have to find different ways to distract the coming invaders. And then at the end of it, you have to fight who's left. So you have to fight. If you did a great job, you don't have to fight many people at all. If you did a terrible job, you have to fight a ton of people. I think it's a very fun, very different chapter. I think the music is phenomenal. I think the fights make a lot of sense. I think the characters are great. And the Sundown Kid is a really cool character, even though he's a very simple, kind of stereotypical Western character. In a grand RPG, you don't see Western as a genre that much. I guess Fallout would kind of count. But then again, that's post-apocalyptic, so you can kind of just sprinkle a little Western flavor into it. But yeah, I don't know. A cowboy RPG as a whole game, that would be great. That would be great. And I kind of got to live that out for about an hour and a half in this game. So that's why it's my favorite. So, have you played Live Alive, whatever, Live Alive? That's not right. Have you played it? If not, what are you waiting for? If you have a Switch, that makes sense. But absolutely play this if you have a Switch. What are your favorite chapters of this game? If you have played it, please let me know. I'm very interested to see. I feel like my opinions are going to be very different. I can totally see why someone would find the near future, you get to have superpowers and mech fights, and why isn't that higher? Someone had to be 7th, and I can see how someone would fall in love with the story of the distant future and have that as number 1. And I can see how someone would pick anyone at the top and hate it. Look at the Twilight of Ido Japan and be like, that was convoluted and a mess, and I hated it, and slap it down at the bottom. Whatever your thoughts are, please tell me down below. I'm always happy to hear them. Thank you so much for watching. As always, like this if you like this, subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you at some point.